our lunch and learn. And if you would, please just stop eating for a second. Please rise, take off your hats, and we will start with prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day. We thank you for the many blessings you've given us and the many, many blessings you've given our country. We thank you for the gracious gift and sacrifice of all who have served our country, especially those who paid the ultimate price with their lives to keep our freedoms here. We thank you for this food. We thank you for the hands that prepared it. May it bless our bodies and bodies be of service to you. All these things we ask in your heavenly name. Amen.
Amen.
And stay upright, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, Larry Head will sing our national anthem.
Thank you, Tom. Feel free to join in. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you.
So, welcome. Thanks to everybody for coming. We've got another terrific program coming up. I want to thank the VFW 1114 for allowing us all to be here, and want to thank you all for your support. It's greatly appreciated in challenging times, as it were. But again, thank you for coming. Coming up, we have some events. Next one is on June 6th is the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and we have some volunteers that are going to be giving a program. Mr. Jason right there is going to be spectacular. No pressure whatsoever. Let's see, on June 20th, Ed Brundig is talking about the space program, the early days of that. We've got a fly-in in September. We've got warbirds coming in, and we've started the tank ride again. So that's coming up, and pretty excited about that. And also, just as a heads up, D. Patrick had a fundraiser in conjunction with BMW, and they're going to present a check this afternoon at 3:30 at their place on Green River Road, and don't know how much, but it's all appreciated. But if anybody wants to show up and just kind of flesh out the crowd, we'd certainly appreciate it. Oh, and Meredith Marshall, are you here, Meredith?
Yeah,
Okay, we have a new employee. She started Monday. She's our administrator. And like I said, she started Monday and she's still with us. So I think it's a real good sign. And, oh, here we go. Miss Meredith. So, very nice young lady, and you want to say a few words?
Sure.
Well,
Hi everyone. I've just joined the museum as the new office administrator. Just moved here from Indianapolis this last weekend, and I'm really excited to be part of the team.
what speech did they tell you?
I don't remember. Thank you.
I told her that. I told her to say that she was really glad to be here and just honored to work for us. Evidently not. So, okay. I think that's it. So, now, David Coker, a West Sider. We were just discussing, I'm from Howell originally, so a red-blooded West Sider, but David and I both went to Rice. I graduated in '67, he graduated in '71. And then he went to IU, graduated from there in '78, and your major was?
Public and Environmental Affairs.
Oh, so, worked for 12 years in D.C. and as a columnist.
I was a reporter for a small weekly newspaper on Capitol Hill.
But then,
And,
go ahead.
and then I wrote columns for 30 years for a newspaper until December 2015 when Gannett bought the paper and they canceled my column.
But
I didn't have anything else to say, and I apparently did not have an audience, so.
well, you have a good one today. So, David's talk today is on the training of pilots during World War II. And as we discussed earlier, it's something that's been romanticized, but it really wasn't. And for what we did in a very short period of time is pretty amazing. And just look forward to David's take on it. And you're on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Well, as so often happens, I got into this material and realized that this was a much larger story than what I had initially thought. But I feel like it's important to keep these stories in the public memory. So that's why I enjoy doing these talks and doing this research, to be able to present these memories. As the insignia of the Army Air Force, Army Air Corps, the Corps was the unit of the U.S. Armed Services that was responsible for training pilots and air crew in various specialties during World War II. And prior to Pearl Harbor, we were ill-prepared to develop an Air Force that would have global reach and impact, both in Europe and in the Far East. But that's part of this story. At the beginning of the war, well, late 30s, early 40s, we had one training field in the country, Randolph Field in the San Antonio area of Texas. And there were also Brooks and Kelly fields, which were also in that general vicinity. And so the first thing that the Air Corps considered was, we need more airfields. We need more training facilities if we're going to go to war. In 1939, fewer than 1,000 pilots graduated from primary flight training. By 1943, that number exploded to 160,000 pilots graduating from primary pilot training. So what I'm about to talk about is the bureaucratic chaos and so forth that was evident and necessary to pull that off. We needed airplanes, we needed airfields, we needed everything. We were ill prepared to go to war in the late 1930s. In fact, I am reading the biography of General Jimmy Doolittle right now. And a little anecdote, of course, between the wars, General Doolittle flew airplanes in the competition, the Bendix Air Races and others. And Shell Oil Company became his sponsor in his racing activities, and he knew some executives from Shell. And in 1937, he started hammering on them to start refining 100-octane aviation fuel because it improved the performance of aviation engines so much. And apparently at that time, there were petroleum geologists in the country that knew that certain petroleum that we found in this country was better suited to 100-octane gasoline than others. And so they would go and look for the oil that was good to refine 100-octane gasoline. And so they made a bunch of it, and they gave it to the Air Force, and they tested it in various aircraft. And they figured out about a 30% across-the-board improvement in performance of aviation engines. So in January 1st, 1938, they issued a new regulation that stated that any aircraft engine that was being produced should start using 100-octane fuel. And that was one of his little personal accomplishments, but it was important to the overall objective of developing an Air Force that was able to do things. Here's a recruiting poster from early in the war. In October of 1940, it was estimated that there could be as many as 9,300 students in flight training at any one time. One of the initial moves for the Air Corps was to condense the pilot training experience necessary to train many tens of thousands of pilots in a very short period of time. And training was split into primary, basic, which was intermediate, and then advanced pilot training. 10 weeks, 30 weeks, however many it took to, and these would sometimes take place in different parts of the country because of the availability of certain aircraft. They would fly different aircraft for different levels of training. And we had limited facilities to teach just basic flying maneuvers, navigation, fixed gunnery, bombing, strafing, high and low level reconnaissance. All of these were missions that pilots were going to have to do or be aware of if they were going to fly in combat. And so the first thing they needed to do was establish some additional facilities. So they in Alabama, and then another one out in California, and they divided the country up, and depending upon what part of the country you were from would determine which field you would go to. And after your training, you would be dispatched to one of the 20 air forces that we had throughout the country and later scattered all over the world. You'll recall that the 8th Air Force, the third from the top in the second row, was located in Great Britain. And the rest of these were various other places around the world. And soon we had thousands of volunteers. And at the very beginning of their training, they would go into what was called pre-training, which they would learn courtesy, military procedures, how a soldier's supposed to act, march, live, eat, sleep, da-da-da. And this is long before we're talking about actual air pilot training. There was a winnowing process that would take place throughout the Air Corps. And they had aptitude tests and written exams and consultations with the recruits to determine if they had what it took to become a pilot. Some did and some didn't. And there was a lot of discrimination among those that made it and those that didn't, because everybody wanted to be a pilot. It was a thing. But it became incumbent upon the Air Corps to impress upon these recruits that we had other jobs that needed to be done. We needed navigators. We needed gunners. We needed people that knew how to strafe. We needed reconnaissance. We needed all these various different aspects, and not all of these people could necessarily be pilots. And actually, in the case of bombers, obviously, you needed about 9 more personnel, or eight more personnel than the number of pilots that would be actually operating the aircraft. So it was a daunting task. And they even contracted with private operations for a while. And one of the companies that was contracted by the Air Corps to train pilots was Pan American World Airways. And they trained these pilots in flying boats instead of land-based aircraft, because it's what they had on hand, because they were training pilots for the Pan Am Clipper. And that's what they were using pilots for. But anyway, the training facilities they had, they were equipped with flying boats, and that's obviously the performance characteristics of those aircraft much different from what pilots would be flying in the Air Force. But in any event, they needed specialties. And some needed to learn how to use the Norden bomb sight, which was top secret. And we won't go into how accurate or inaccurate that was, but it was a pretty amazing series of accomplishments. And here you see in the foreground at Randolph Field in Texas, men marching in formation while other groups are walking toward their aircraft that they are about to start learning to fly in. And I believe this is an array of multi-Valiant aircraft in the background. They're either Vultee Valiants or T-6s, and I can't see the tailplanes well enough to tell which one they are, but they both had radial engines. As demand for flying personnel increased dramatically in early 1940, increased activity became the norm at Randolph Field. They had to learn to drill and do all the other things that men in the military had to do. And here you see a pilot training in the front cockpit and the instructor in the rear. Usually the front cockpit would have a more complete array of flight instruments in the panel, but both the student and the instructors had engine and prop controls, if they were there, foot pedals for rudder control and brake control, and a stick to move the ailerons and control surfaces. In these early trainer aircraft, there were no radios, so there was a voice tube that ran from one cockpit to the other. And that's how they communicated back and forth, was through a voice tube, because they didn't have an onboard intercom system. Things were primitive at first, you know, and they didn't have the radios. They didn't have the engines. At the time, we could actually build more airframes than we could build engines. And so there was a drastic shortage of engines, and many times they would have to substitute different engines in different airframes than what they were originally designed to use. Now, as a part of the ground training, obviously, one of the important things was being able to identify friend or foe. And that's what this is. You want to be able to tell a Messerschmitt from one of our planes, a P-40 or P-51 or some other engine with an inline engine, or airframe with an inline engine, and twin engine as well, you know, because they're going to be shooting at Messerschmitts and Hinkels and all kinds of things that had multiple engines. So you had to learn what were our aircraft and what were their aircraft and what was the profile and how you're going to see them from the air. And they had simulators, like you see on the left-hand side, to simulate actual operation of, this is not for pilot training necessarily, it'd be for a gunnery position, but again, friend or foe identification, very essential, and had to be drilled into people, even ground personnel for that matter, because they would encounter foreign aircraft. Now, the curriculum during advanced training for single-engine pilots included coursework in formation flying and in instrument flying. And some of these aircraft would have special instruments that would use, and they would put the hood over the cockpit so the pilot couldn't see, and they'd be expected to take off and land the aircraft safely using instruments only. And then also learning the techniques necessary to fly in formation. And here you see an array of PT-19s flying in formation. This was a very, very important technique to learn, especially for bomber pilots. And something that dramatizes this is this was an actual formation of B-24s from the 2nd Bomb Group formation. The 20th Squadron was lagging behind the others, as you can see here, and they're out of position in the overall formation. And as a result of this, that hind squadron was attacked by German fighters. And 9 of these aircraft from this unit were shot down. It killed killed 40 men, ended up with 46 prisoners of war, and only 4 people from that formation that were shot down evaded capture. Part of the ground school included link trainers that would be used to teach gunnery, strafing, shooting an airplane, using the machine guns that would be on board the aircraft to shoot things. And of course, for gunnery personnel, they would have to learn how to shoot moving aircraft, how to lead them, declination, that kind of thing. That would have been a water-cooled machine gun, but it's not hooked up, I don't think. Now here you see some young pilot trainees posed in front of their steerman with their instructor. They look pretty proud. If they had just graduated, I guess they should be, because not everybody can become a pilot. And one of those famous pilots to come out of World War II, I found this picture and I just had to include this in here. Yes, he was in the Marine Corps. Yes, he did other things later, but this is Second Lieutenant John Glenn, who later, in the 1960s, became the first astronaut to orbit the Earth. And he received his pilot training during World War II. And he flew F-4U Corsairs and other aircraft, mainly in the Pacific. And he completed 57 combat missions during World War II. He had the right stuff, even before he became an astronaut. He was a handsome guy too, wasn't he? I met him when he was a senator. He's a really nice guy. The first aircraft that a pilot trainee would encounter during their pilot training, in primary training, was a Fairchild PT-19, and I couldn't really find a name. I thought they had a name, but I guess they really didn't. But it was a rather primitive aircraft, but advanced for training standards, because it was made out of plywood, and they did have some problems with weather in certain areas. The plywood would start delaminating and other things, other problems, but it had it was 28 feet long, wingspan 36, height 10 feet 6 inches, wing area 200 square feet, gross weight 2,545, and the power plant was a 6-cylinder inverted, air-cooled, inline Ranger engine that produced 200 horsepower. Maximum speed was 115 mile an hour, range 350 miles, and the service ceiling was about 15,000 feet. And they were very stable, rugged aircraft, and just what the doctor ordered for primary aircraft training at the time. So a lot of the pilots, that's what they would encounter. Here you have a 3-view diagram. Fairchild developed this airplane on its own in the 30s, and it didn't use the strategic materials that other aircraft would use. That's why they built it out of plywood. Now, of course, this is the one that we're most familiar with because this is one that's a part of the collection, which was a Boeing Model 75 Stearman. Actually, it was built by the Stearman Aircraft Company that became a division of Boeing. But Stearman existed on its own prior to that. And Lloyd Stearman designed the precursor to this particular aircraft. But then there were three employees of his that were aircraft engineers that developed this airplane. And it had various designations, PT 13, 17, 23, or 27, depending upon the engine that was used. The three engineers were Max Short, Harold Zipp, and J. Jack Clark. They took a 1931 design of Lloyd Stearman, and this was the evolution. And they turned it over to the Army Air Force, and they tested it, and soon after they received an order for the first 20. And it was powered by a 210 horsepower Lycoming engine. The first flew January 1st, 1934. Soon after the maiden voyage, there were flight tests conducted at Wright Field in Dayton, and Naval Air Station Anacostia in Maryland, and Pensacola, Florida. And after they tested it, they ordered 20. The Navy later ordered 21, and they stipulated that they incorporate some changes on their own, what became known as the Model 73. And they wanted a 200 horsepower Wright J5 engine, which was the identical engine that was used in 1927 in Charles Lindbergh's Ryan aircraft that he flew from New York to Paris. And so that was the version that the Navy wanted, and otherwise the airframe was pretty much identical. And that autumn, the Air Force tested the aircraft with a Lycoming engine designated at the PT-13A, and they ordered 20 aircraft. And then the Navy ordered 20 aircraft, and they were off to the races. And all told, some 10,686 of these beautiful aircraft were built. And they were produced for the Army, the Navy, and dozens of foreign governments. The plane was called the Cadet by the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Model 75 biplane featured a fabric cover welded steel tube fuselage with spruce wing construction and enjoyed a reputation as a simple, cost-effective design. Its rugged, forgiving nature made it an excellent training aircraft to introduce young pilots. At the beginning of the war, demand for Stearman trainers outstripped engine supply. So another engine built by Jacobs, the R755-7 radial, was incorporated, designated at the PT-18. And this is the livery for a naval variant. Notice the red stripe and the blue tail. I think they're pretty aircraft, even though they're biplanes. And here's a 3-view drawing. Now, this, you'll understand why I stuck this in here. This is a Seversky BT-8, which was the first all-metal monoplane trainer that the Army Air Force had acquired, or Army Air Corps, for training purposes in 1936. And Seversky, of course, was the prerequisite of the P-47, Republic Aviation. And the guy that helped Seversky design this was Alexander Kartvelli, for Alexander Seversky, who was a World War I pilot that lost one of his legs in combat. And this is what they came up with for the Army Air Corps in 1936, but it was found to have stall characteristics that were not forgiving, and so consequently, it was they built a bunch of these, but I think they built 30 of them, and they were withdrawn from service in a few months because they were too dangerous. But later, unofficially known as the double bolt, this was an adaptation of the Razorback P-47 that had an extended contract, cockpit. Curtiss Aircraft built about 350 P-47 airframes under license from Republic, and while they were assembling these, they built 2 of these, which were trainer variants of the standard P-47. Like I said, they only made 2 of these, but the overall aircraft, you see the design similarities between the Seversky and the P-47 in trainer mode. And you can see a direct evolution from Seversky's early aircraft through the P-43 Lancer to this airframe, which was different. Now, the intermediate training aircraft that was developed was the Vultee BT-13 Valiant. This is a basic training aircraft, which is between primary and advanced. So you do your initial 10-week training in a Stearman or a PT-19, and then you go to this. And generally, pilots were sent from one airfield to another for this training. Because of the availability of aircraft, they didn't have these things everywhere, so they would move the pilots rather than move the planes. And it was heavier, faster, had a 450 horsepower engine than either the Stearman or the PT-19. And they tested this aircraft in 1939 and had some reservations because the prototype had a 600 horsepower engine. They thought that was too hot for pilot training, and it had retractable landing gear, and they didn't want to incorporate that into the aircraft. So Vultee came back and they built another version with a 450 horsepower engine and fixed landing gear. And 11,538 of these were built, had a top speed of 180 miles an hour. And so it was a little higher, a little hotter, had a little higher ceiling. This is a naval variant. These aircraft were all very similar. And here you see it's 28 feet 10 inches, 42-foot wingspan, gross weight 4,400 pounds, one Pratt & Whitney 450 horsepower radial, two-bladed Hamilton standard two-position prop. See, that pilot had to learn how to manipulate the prop and how to, I believe this had it had a steerable tail wheel. Because the pilot sat very close to the enormous engine, it got the nickname of the Vultee vibrator, because a pilot could feel the torque of the engine translate through the engine mounts and the airframe. And actually, my uncle, Walt Troyer, who was from here in Evansville, he worked on these aircraft at Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida. And he worked on them, and he said, when I was a little kid, he told me that was what this airplane was called. And they had a lot of them apparently down there, but they were stable and a little bit hotter than the primary trainers, but and they could teach a pilot things that they couldn't teach them on the primary trainer. Now this is the granddaddy. This is the most advanced single-engine advanced trainer used in World War II, the North American T6 Texan. Notice the rather triangular-shaped rudder that's kind of unique to this airframe. It was also designated the SNJ by the Navy, as in these colors. 4,388 entered service with the Army Air Force Flying Training Command in 42 and 43, but they made a lot more of these. There's the statistics. 29 feet, 42 feet, 56, a little bit heavier than the previous one. 600 horsepower engine, retractable landing gear, maximum speed 208 miles an hour with a higher service ceiling of 24,000 feet. These are very attractive aircraft that you can see at many air shows, and there used to be a couple of them here locally as well. Now, this was the Douglas B-18 Bolo, which was a development of the Douglas DC-2 airliner. And they really weren't very successful as a bomber, but they were great as a twin-engine trainer aircraft. A lot of these things got destroyed on the ground by Japanese attacks early in the war. They weren't very well armed. I don't know much about their bombing characteristics, but they just weren't a very good combat aircraft. But they found that they worked well as a twin-engine trainer. So that's what they did. They moved them to training units across the country. And it was one of those strange things where it was an adaptation of a relatively successful commercial aircraft that just really didn't cut it as a combat plane. Now, I'll talk about the opposite situation in a minute, but there's the statistics. 6 for crew, 89 feet long, 2,400 gross weight, 2 Wright 9-cylinder air-cooled radials. Now, this was the first designated twin-engine advanced trainer that was developed, and it was the Beechcraft AT-7 Navigator. And actually, this plane was specifically designed to train navigators. And it was very successful, although they didn't build a lot of them. There we have the statistics. The crew, 6. You have an instructor, 1 student pilot, and 4 students inside. It had an aerodrome and positions for 3 other trainees, and then, of course, pilot and co-pilot up front. And maximum speed was 225 miles an hour, range 1,200 miles, service ceiling 26,000 feet, and rate of climb 1850 per minute. Now, being a pilot in the war, you know, it's been glamorized by Hollywood, but it was hard work. If you were on a daily or 2-day or 3-day rotation in a bomber squadron somewhere in some far-flung place in the world, it was a lot of drudgery, and it was dangerous. You had people shooting at you every time you went up. So there was a lot of things they had to teach people on the ground, and here you see an instrument training simulator. This is a cockpit mock-up of a B-25 twin engine. And don't get me wrong, they used frontline aircraft like P-40s, B-25s, B-26s in some of these various training centers, because they had to get some seat time on what people were actually going to be flying before they would send them to some theater. But this was the ultimate goal. In the Army Air Force, you wanted to get your wings. And it was very important. And you'd learn to fly in formation. There's a formation of P-47s, the early ones. And if you're in the Navy, that's what you wanted to get, which was a Navy wing. And you'd get put on a carrier out in the Pacific with any of a variety of different aircraft that you may or may not have trained on, or in a bomber flying over Europe. But what happened? You know, we've never been in a situation like we are right now in the world. It's probably the most dangerous period of time in the history of this planet. To think that we could be entering into another one of this nonsense. And so I wanted to put in this statistical table to show us what happened. Aviation was not a sure thing. It was still very much an experimental endeavor at the beginning of World War II. And we had a lot of planes that really weren't that great. We don't like to admit that to ourselves, but we did. And these statistics indicate that. 1941, there were 1,304 accidents, 228 aircraft damaged, and just under 200 people died. By 1944, 20,000, 5387, 5616. Aircraft losses. Total aircraft loss, 65,164 aircraft. In combat, 22,948 airplanes. This is the statistic that scares me. 21,000 aircraft accidents here in the United States. Accidental losses overseas, 20,633. On delivery here in the United States, 1,000. 15,000 died in aircrew training alone. But of course, in 1939, less than 1,000 pilots finished primary training. By 1943, it was up to over 165,000 graduated from basic training. And then finally, the aircraft deaths in combat. 52,173. Accidental aircrew deaths, 25,844. And accidental deaths in the United States, 15,000. We all should be praying that we never have to encounter something like this ever again. And that's why I do these talks. I don't want to be grim. I just want to be accurate and remind us that peace is a very fragile thing, and the inner instincts of human nature have never changed over time, going all the way back to the ancients and biblical times. And we got to keep that in our mind as well as we honor those that have passed before us, those that survive to this day. And I understand that there's at least one World War II pilot in our audience today, and there are other pilots here. But I want to thank you all very much for coming this morning and allowing me to present this material to you. I hope I did it justice. Thank you. Questions?
Oh, okay. We're open for
Comments?
any-
Questions? Comments? Yeah.
So, here we go.
Understand that Breckenridge had a glider pilot training area there in Morganville, Kentucky.
That's quite possible. They had